How's it going, everybody? Christian from Treasure Town here, and today we're going to be taking a look at the complete evolution of the half dollar. Now, this is going to span all the way back to 1794 and then come up to the present day. There's been so many changes. We're going to be talking about the values of the coins, any errors or varieties, interesting facts about how they transitioned the design, and there's specific things about specific types of coins that are interesting to learn about. So this is going to be an educational one. Let's get into the presentation. I'll be talking over it, and we'll start with the very first half dollar. So here is our first design, but before we talk about it, I do want to say one thing, and that's that the half dollars were more popular from a collector standpoint than the dimes and quarters from the start. They had a fair amount of them made, and they were also pretty inexpensive, so that's what kind of drove the interest. Now, the very first design that we'll talk about is the flowing hair half dollar, made from 1794 to 1795. 1794 was a lot scarcer than the 95, as there were 23,000 as opposed to 300,000 made, and was also a lot more valuable. The values that we do have are the very circulated refers to, on the Sheldon 70 scale, a 4. Lightly circulated is like a XF40, and then uncirculated is Mint State 65. So these are about $1,000 really circulated, 6,500 lightly circulated, and 450,000 very circulated. And the 1795 has a lot of different varieties, including recut dates, 2 and 3 leaves varieties, the small head, and the A over E. A lot of varieties because they were new to producing coins, so the quality control was definitely not quite as high. And the coins were workhorse coins made for use in commerce, so most of these are going to be pretty well worn. That's why it's so scarce to see the uncirculated versions, and that's why the price goes up so much. The Draped bust small eagle was the next design that we saw from 1796 to 1797, and the obverse has Miss Liberty this time facing right with the drapery over her neckline. That's why it's called Draped bust, and the denomination shifts to the back of the coin. It says 1/2. In terms of the redesign there, it's significantly different. The eagle is just a different one than it was before, a different positioning and everything. 1796 has 2 varieties with 15 and 16 stars, while all of the 1797 coins have 15 stars, but this half dollar is actually the rarest and most desired of all of the silver design types. The original mintage for both years was a tiny 3,918 pieces that have a survival estimate of around 5% today, so 200 to 300 pieces likely exist total. Now, before we move along, a very circulated coin here is, and you can see the increased prices, $30,000, lightly circulated $100,000, and uncirculated $1.5 million, so way more than the previous 1794 and 5. The next major shift would be mostly on the back of the coin, actually, so you can see very similar front of the coin. On the back, though, they have a totally new design, and the mintage of halves resumed later. There weren't in 1798, 9, and 1800, but the front of the coin cut down on the number of stars on each of the coins, and the difference on the reverse, obviously the distinctly different eagle that was featuring the Great Seal. 1801 and 1802 are the toughest to find out of these, but none of the dates are super crazy, and that really reflects, obviously these values, just to say when I put them up, are not for the special dates, they're more for the normal dates, but 175 for a really circulated one, 1300 for lightly circulated, and 50,000 for uncirculated. As is the pattern, there are a lot of errors and die varieties, including the 1805 over 4, 1806 over 5, and an 1806 6 over inverted 6. So tons of cool errors on these. As we move along, we get to one that lasted for a much longer time in terms of the style, and that's the capped bust half dollar. And Liberty now faces left, while the reverse shows the eagle perched on this olive branch. You'd see that on a lot of different places. I was checking out some old bottles that had that design the other day. There's some of the scarcities in this range, but most of them are pretty easily attainable, and they were held and traded by banks, so a lot of them survive with pretty light wear as opposed to being really beat down in circulation. The silver dollars were discontinued from 1803 to 1840, so this was like the biggest coin really circulating in silver at that point. There's a lot of different ways to collect, with overdates, numeral-shaped varieties, large and small letterings, different star sizes, edge styles, and other anomalies, and the values are not too prohibitive on a lot of them if you're just looking to pick up one date. 65 for really circulated, 150 for lightly circulated, and 5.5 thousand for really uncirculated. Next up, we have something that's pretty rare, again, as opposed to the previous design, and that's the cap bust $50 with the reeded edge, and this is kind of a different design style. Steam-powered presses were introduced to Philadelphia, and Christian Gobrecht makes a slightly new style, again, with that reeded edge. Only 1,200 pieces were struck in 1836, while millions existed in 1837, but the value is still about 1,000 for the really circulated, 3.5 for lightly, and 5.5 for uncirculated. There were a fair amount of these saved, so that's why the values don't differ too crazily, and obviously the 1836 are going to be a lot more expensive. 1838 and 1839 see the cap bust stay in terms of the general style of the obverse, and there's a reeded edge, except this time it says half doll on the bottom. 1838-0 is one of the biggest rarities all across the series. Only 20 were struck, and those were the first branch mint $50. Previously, it had just been at Philadelphia. And when there was a mint mark, it was displayed above the date on the obverse right here. So that's pretty neat, in my opinion. Values on these are $50 for really circulated, $200 for lightly circulated, and $5.5 for uncirculated, so much less prohibitive than the previous design. That brings us to a wide variety of seated Liberty coins. There are a lot of different types, but I'm not going to give values for all of them, just general ones. This one was a 1 year. It was the first type, and there was no drapery on her elbow, but this is the other 1839 style, and was the last denomination to change this design over to the seated coins. A lot of them made it in 1838. In terms of values, 100 for very circulated, 1,000 for lightly circulated. These are quite rare for the uncirculated, though, at about 150,000. As we move along, this is the next type that gets introduced, the Type 2. And the difference, as you can see, is the with drapery right there. Then there's something called no motto, which we'll explain later. But these include a fair amount of scarce varieties like the 1842-0 small date, 44-0 double date, and the 47/6 coins, as well as a 1853 no arrows coins. They would transition to arrows briefly as changes were made to the coin. That's the next type. But then they end up sticking out with this design for a little while after the arrows are removed. And the New Orleans coins on this series were often struck pretty weakly, specifically in the stars on the obverse. So that's just something to look out for. Lastly, there was 1840 and 1845. Sometimes there was over polishing, so it appeared like the drapery actually didn't exist. That's not because of any error with the wrong hub. It's just that they over polished the dies. These coins are not super expensive. $50 for really circulated, $200 for lightly circulated, and about $8,000 for uncirculated. And here are those arrows that I talked about. The only reason for that change is that there was a slight reduction in the weight from probably about 8% down to 192 grains. And they're not super rare. It's just showing that these coins were slightly less in weight because there was silver content as an issue. They then took those off. They also made something called the no motto arrows, which was the Type 4, and they style changed the reverse as the reverse rays are deleted. You can see right there, there's the rays. They didn't have that before. They added them, and then, here, that was too fast. They added them, and then they went on and took them off again. These were mainly produced in Philadelphia and New Orleans, but the San Francisco Mint started making some for the first time ever in 1855. The most interesting variation is a 55/54 overdate, which can be found both on the business and proof strike coins. As we move along, that big motto change that I was talking about, everything's the same except they put "In God We Trust" above the eagle right there, and that's a new type completely. And Carson City opened during this time, which was a Nevada mint, I think is how you're supposed to pronounce it. And they started making coins for the type, which are some of the rarest coins on the series. And 1878S is the highlight with a mintage of only 12,000. These coins are about $40 really circulated, $100 lightly circulated, and $2,500 for pristine examples. Lastly, we do have a Type 6. That's the with motto and arrows. They increased it by 0.9 grains, so the coins would weigh exactly 12.5 grams. And again, this just showed the slight increase in weight. Now we get to the much more attainable coins, and that is the Barber $50, started in 1892, and Liberty is back to facing right and wearing a Phrygian cap. The design is the same as the dime and quarter design, and the New Orleans and Denver had a few. They weren't producing the whole time, while Philadelphia and San Francisco was. There's not too many significant rarities, but the 1892 O over S, 1893 S, 1897 O over S, and 1914 and 1915 are some of the tougher coins to find. And the notable interesting part about these is that there's a scarcity of high-grade circulated pieces because XFs and AUs were almost always enhanced in the 60s and 70s. They tried to make them look uncirculated, so they pretty much ruined their value. And these coins are pretty tough to find in better condition. Very circulated ones are $20, lightly circulated $150, and uncirculated $1,500. One of my favorite designs in uncirculated grades. Next up, there was a design competition in 1916 that resulted in Adolf Weinmann's selection that replaced the Barber design. And he was a sculptor who also made the Mercury dime design. So he had some of the prettiest coins and the most iconic collectible ones that are well known to this date. The motif seems inspired by the double eagle design of 1907, and the mint mark appeared on the obverse for 2 years before switching to the back kind of at 8 o'clock down there. There are no extreme rarities for this series, but 1921 coins, specifically 1921P and 21D, are pretty scarce, and proof started in 1936 going through 1942. I don't think we have them for 43, 44, 45, 46, 47. Values on these, the very circulated ones are just worth their silver content. Lightly circulated might be slightly better, but generally still at the silver content range, maybe a few dollars over. And then uncirculated are about $80. So they're definitely coming down in value from the previous ones. And that trend would continue with the Franklin $50, which are almost always worth spot unless they're uncirculated and especially have full bell lines. We'll talk about that. But these show Benjamin Franklin, and the small eagle and E pluribus unum are on the back, in addition to that Liberty bell, just because they needed to fulfill the Coinage Act of 1792, having an eagle and E pluribus unum. It's been criticized as a design due to the simplicity and plainness coming off the Walking Liberty $50, but they're pretty popular coins these days and have the full bell lines as a designation that can make them much more expensive. That's when these bell lines are not worn away. So that's just something to look out for. They can drastically impact the prices of coins and bring them to hundreds of dollars as opposed to a few bucks above spot for the right dates. There's no significant key date or mint mark to look for, so this is one that I'd recommend if you want to fill out a date and mint mark set. This is probably a solid one to do that on. Next up is something that's just a spot coin, and except for a few errors. This is the Kennedy $50 from 1964 to 1974, and then 1977 and on. We'll talk about what happened on the in-between, but 1964 they were 90% silver, then 65 to 70, 40% silver. 1970 is worth a little bit more because they're very scarce, just produced, I think, for mint sets, but they're a pretty low used coin, and that's why they pretty much phased them out by 2002. So there's not much new demand, so it hasn't really been a problem. And this was created as a tribute to JFK, who died in November 1963. So it's a commemorative to him. 1992 marked the first year that collector coins would be bought that were silver again. And there's a lot of varieties associated with these coins, with the most well-known being the accented hair varieties in 1964, which were the first coins, proof coins, that were struck before there was a design change. So just something to look out if you have 1964 proof sets. And the last coin is just the Bicentennial $50. 75 and 76, they had the 200th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and they changed the designs on the quarter, $50, and dollar to reflect that. And the $50 had the view of Independence Hall on the back of it, which was kind of a neat tribute there. And most of them were clad coins. There are a few collector versions that were 40% silver, so you can just check the edge. If there's no copper coloration, then it will be 40% silver. And while it's pretty common, it's a cool, notable design switch, and that's why it was featured here today. So that brings us to the end of our discussion of the complete evolution of the $50. So cool to see the breadth that the different designs that the half dollar is taking on, and we're going to get into the dollar probably in about a month. So I'll look forward to seeing you on the videos until then, but that video will be coming out, so look out for it. Thanks for watching the video. I'd encourage you to like, comment, and subscribe, and if you want to get in touch with me, do so on my website, treasuretownYT.com, my Instagram, TreasureTownYT, or my Facebook, Treasure Town. I've got links in the description, and I'll see you on some of my other videos.